This is the Classical Ideas Podcast. Welcome to episode 9 of the Classical Ideas Podcast. Today's topic of discussion is the Jain religion, or Jainism as it's also called. When I think about Jainism as a religion, or Jains as a people, I think about peace and austerity. To me, the core of Jainism is nonviolence, also called Ahimsa, the liberation of the soul through moksha and fervent vegetarianism. Jains are known for brushing sidewalks so they don't accidentally step on a bug, or brushing behind them so they don't accidentally kill an insect when rolling over in the middle of the night, or wearing masks when they're outside so they don't ingest anything. Jains are known for not eating root vegetables because a carrot or a potato or an onion will cease to be alive if it's picked, in contrast to something like an apple tree, which won't die when the fruit is picked. Jains seek to do as little damage to the world as they possibly can. Some Jain monks are so dedicated to the value of aparigraha, or non-attachment, that they live completely unclad or skyclad. Essentially, the monks of this sect, known as the Digambara, wear only the sky without physical clothing. Simply put, Jainism is likely the world's most peaceful religion. Jains are extremely peaceful. I find Jainism endlessly fascinating, and I often find myself scouring YouTube documentaries for scenes of Jain temples, translated interviews with Jain monks, and watching footage of Jain monks and nuns walking barefoot through urban centers of India, carrying all of their worldly belongings on their back, wearing a mask so as not to accidentally kill anything, and going past a McDonald's. The contrasts are stark. There are roughly 4.4 million Jains in India, where the total population is around 1.2 billion. Approximately 100,000 to 150,000 Jains live abroad, with about 50,000 in the United States and Canada, 30,000 in the UK and Europe, and 20,000 in Africa, with the rest spread throughout other Asian countries. Today I bring you a conversation with a Jain living abroad. My favorite thing about Nishant Jain is that he is very much a student of his own religion and openly admits to wanting to know more, and how he is also not an expert. Nishant and I have long Facebook chat threads where he will tell me new things he's learning about parallels between Hinduism and Jainism, meditation, and Buddhism. As a side note, if this conversation about Jainism interests you and you want to know more, I highly recommend going and checking out a podcast called The History of Philosophy in India by the philosophers Peter Adamson and Janardhan Ganeri. Their 15th episode, called Mostly Harmless, is an excellent academic discussion of Ahimsa that I have found repeatedly useful. I even use it in my classes with my students. I love that podcast, and you should go find it. So, without further ado, here is my conversation about Jainism with Nishant Jain. Welcome to the Classical Ideas Podcast. This is Greg Soden. I am here today with my friend Nishant Jain. Nish, thanks for coming on the Classical Ideas Podcast.
Thank you, Greg, for having me over.
So I want to start off just by kind of telling the audience, what is Jainism? In the United States, we don't really think about the Jains very often as a group. So can you just kind of tell us what Jainism is?
Well, Jainism is an ancient Indian religion. It's so ancient that they have found seals and emblems in the Harappa ruins. I was reading a book recently. But the main principle or premise of Jainism is Ahimsa. Uh, it also translates to non-violence. Uh, Basically, not hurting the lowest of living organisms. And it has other principles such as anekantvada, which means many-sidedness. Uh, it refers to also non-attachment, asceticism, and the followers of Jainism take five main vows: ahimsa, which is non-violence; satya, truth; asteya, which is non-stealing; brahmacharya, which is celibacy; aparigraha, which is non-attachment. Now, these principles have impacted the Jain culture in many ways, such as you know, leading to a predominantly vegetarian lifestyle that avoids harm to animals and their life cycles. And the motto, simple motto of Jainism is live and let live. And it's the function of these souls to help one another. One of the basic prayer of Jainism is known as the Namokar mantra, and it goes like this: Namo Aryantaram, Namo Siddhanam, Namo Ayaryanam, Namo Uvajjayanam, Namo Loe Savve Sahunam, ऐसे पंच नमोकारो सर्व पाव पणाशनो मंगलावचे सव्वे सिंह padamam havai mangalam. What it means is, I bow to the Arihants, the conquerors. I bow to the Siddhas. I bow to the Acharyas, the Upadhyayas, and I bow to all the sages of the world. And this fivefold salutation completely destroys all sins and all auspicious mantras. It's indeed the most auspicious one, this mantra. So, the Namokar mantra is something that I have said from the time that I gained consciousness when I first remember speaking. So my mother taught me, and we made sure that everyone in the family knew it, and we would chant it. So the principles and the mantra and the whole philosophy about ahimsa and nonviolence is something which is very close to my heart and Jainism.
That is so beautiful, and we're going to kind of explore a few of those concepts that you touched on kind of throughout our chat. So we'll get a little bit deeper into a couple of those for sure. Can you just kind of talk a little bit about your family history with Jainism?
So I had my mother is from a Hindu Vaishnav family. She got married into a Jain family, so my father belonged to a Jain family. And so, as you can imagine, I practiced a mix of both religions, mainly because after my father passed away when I was 2 years old, my mother moved out of the nuclear family. And so she had this freedom of practicing both religions. But that's from the family perspective, But I'm also from Mumbai. It's a cosmopolitan city. And from the city perspective, my very first memories are of crawling in the cleanest of temples of white marble flooring of the temples in a northern suburb called Goregaon in Mumbai, in India. But I also have fond memories of dancing to the tunes of Lejim in the Ganesh Visarjana, being excited to bid adieu to Lord Ganesha and wishing him coming back next year, or participating in an overnight jagran where we sing and chant all night in praise of goddess Durga, or chanting the Mahamrutyunjay mantra of the Shiva, or the Hanuman Chalisa, or willingly reciting the Lord's prayers with a Christian friend in school, because I went to a convent school, a Jesuit school, and hearing the azan in the distance from the mosque, because Mumbai gives you that environment where you're exposed to this secular and eclectic environment. But last but not the least, the Namokar mantra of the Jains, my mom making sure I remember every word of the prayer before a surprise visit for my grandmother.
Wonderful. I mean, that's so unbelievable to think about the experiences that you had growing up in a city like Mumbai, where you're surrounded by so many of these different religions that we don't really think about a lot of the time here in the United States. I mean, obviously, it's getting more awareness, and that's what I'm trying to do with this podcast, is to build that. But you seem like you grew up completely steeped in many things.
Yes, so it's just the environment that you get in a place like Mumbai. My neighbors are people who eat vegetarian food. I have neighbors above me who used to live and they used to eat non-vegetarian food. They were from the south of India. And so you get this eclectic environment in school, with your neighbors, when you go to play. So I think you're exposed to all kinds of religion. So.
Wonderful. So let's kind of dive into some of the, the deeper stuff into Jainism itself as a religion. So what do you see as... Now, whenever I ask you this question, like, I always know that the answers are going to be different for everybody. But what is the purpose to you of Jainism? Like, what's the main, purpose?
Well, the word Jain is derived from the word Jina, which means the conqueror of the self. What it means is that when you say conqueror of the self, is you conquer your inner passions like desire, hatred, anger, pride, and greed by your own efforts. And finally, be able to liberate yourself from the cycle of birth and death, also known as samsara. Now,
sorry.
Jinnah is a spiritual victor, and he has attained supreme knowledge. And all human beings have the potential to become a Jinnah, which is to be able to conquer your own senses. And for those who practice Jainism, you want to ultimately liberate yourself from the birth cycle by following the Jain religion and its principles, and also by conquering hatred, anger, pride. And that is the only purpose of Jain religion. By following Jainism, you become a follower of Ahimsa and do not harm any living organisms. When Jains meet each other, actually, they greet by saying Jai Jinendra, which means I bow to you, the conqueror of your senses.
That's beautiful. It kind of reminds me of, is there any kind of crossover between the phrase Namaste as well, which means that I recognize the God within you? Is there any kind of crossover there?
Yeah, that's interesting because we are taught in Jain families to say Namaste as well. But I think it's more because of the integration. So, my birth certificate had, it would say Hindu-Jain. And I would ask my mother, what does that mean? Am I a Jain or am I a Hindu? And she would say, of course, you're a human first. But then she would say, that doesn't mean, that's more for classification. But so the integration of Hinduism and Jainism, and I'm sure you have read about this. There's a thought that Jainism probably originated from Hinduism. And so, yes, the crossover is there. Namaste is taught to in Jain families as much as in Hindu families. So.
What do you think that the most positive things that Jainism brings to the world are in general? Like, what does Jainism do really well as a religion?
So, Jainism believes in following the teachings of what are known as the Tirthankaras, and the word means the ford makers. So, the Tirthankaras are those 24 people who are able to escape or liberate themselves from the cycle of birth and death. And they adhere to non-violence, non-possessiveness, and went on a path of liberation. The concept of karma and anikantvada in Jainism, I think what it means is the multifacetedness. Jainism recognizes that the truth is multifaceted, and there is truth in other religions. There is not one truth. So those are some things that the religion does well. Non-violence is like the concept that has been famous the world over. Yes.
Fantastic. Do you have any Jain role models or any people within the Jain religion that you personally look up to as exemplary figures?
Well, I wish I had someone who is currently living, but really, my role models are the Tirthankaras, about whom I have read stories. Mahavira, Vardhaman Mahavira was the founder. A lot of people say he was the founder of Jainism, but there are theories about that as well. Rishabha was considered the founder of Jainism, but my real role model is my grandmother. She was someone who would wake up early in the morning and go to the temple barefooted, uh, and she would adhere to a very strict vegetarian diet. Not just vegetarian, but she would replace potatoes with bananas. And I remember her talking fondly about and enjoying of the Jain festivals. When the monks would come to talk, she would be one of those people. Although so many people who actually there's a spectrum of practitioners in Jainism. You will find the monks who are the highest practitioners, and then you would find the Jain laymen who are just trying to follow the rules as much as possible, which is what I consider myself. But my grandmother was someone you would she would enjoy the religion, and she brought this thing where when you observe her you could see the happiness on her face. There was this incident where a monk had we had gone to listen to a monk who was preaching a sermon, and I remember that they started music and she went and danced right in front of hundreds of people. And I'm thinking, grandmom, could be embarrassing. But then you see the joy on her face, and all that embarrassment goes away, and you see how much she's enjoying the religion. So, yeah, she's my role model, and she passed away a few years ago. And when she passed away, actually in a holy place. She had gone to a place called Mawa, which is a very popular pilgrimage place. And when she passed away, they found a chit in her hand, and she made a donation in my name, for the temple. So she's my role model.
Fantastic. That's such a beautiful story. You mentioned a couple things that I kind of want to touch on really quick. You mentioned festivals, and we're in the middle of a festival right now, aren't we, on September 4th, 2017, when we're having this conversation?
Yes, so the Paryushana is the Jains observe a fast, observe a period of 10 days when they follow as much as possible try to go towards the extremes of Jainism, which means that you want to try to stay away from root underground. So we don't eat potatoes, we don't eat onions and garlic, which even otherwise we try to stay away from. But this 10 days is strict. And then at the end of 10 days, a lot of people do fasting. So I know many of my aunts who have done fasting for 10 days. And at the end of the 10-day fasting period, it is like celebration. They celebrate the fact that somebody was able to fast, and that's part of what is known as aparigraha. So you stay away from attachments. Food is a form of attachment, and by doing fasting, you are able to show the world that you are able to achieve non-attachment in a sense. So I remember my aunt doing a fast, and then having a great celebration. And because you fasted for 10 days without food and water, you're so weak, and you're supposed to start by very little water, and there's a whole process to how you rejuvenate the person. So what was it?
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, so that's it. So today is the 9th day, and tomorrow is the 10th day of the Paryushana, and usually it coincides with the Ganesh Visarjana, and I have those in my memories because the day the Ganesh Chaturthi starts is usually the Digambara's Paryushan. Now there's a different sect, Shwetambara in Jainism. That sect follows Paryushana in a different. So
It's only 8 days, right?
It's 8 days, and it ends the day our Paryushana starts. So, and I belong to the Digambara sect. So
excellent. And I know that the Hindu temple here in town is celebrating the last night of the Ganesh Puja this evening where they will submerge the idol and have it dissolve.
Yes, I have never visited that in Colombia, but in Mumbai, I have vivid memories of dancing to the tunes of orchestra and music, and going all the way to the Chopati beach, and we would immerse idols together. So
What is tonight called? Is it Visarjan?
Visarjan.
Yeah.
Visarjan is the, in a way, immersion of the idols.
So I remember a few minutes ago as well, you also talked about Mahavira, who is the 24th Tirthankara of Jainism. So do you know why it's possible for the 24th Tirthankara to be considered the founder? How is that possible?
Well, I don't know. There are, based on my reading, I found different things. Some people think Mahavira is the founder, but that's, I think, is away from the truth. In my readings, I found that Rishabha was the founder, and also Parshvanath is talked about a lot as founder of religion. But my knowledge about that, I wish was more accurate. I know whatever I know is from the books. So the question that how the 24th Tirthankara might be the founder of Jainism is an interesting one, and we would have to explore that maybe in subsequent podcasts. But
Sure. That's great. So there are a lot of problems in the world today. The world is a chaotic place. All you need to do is turn on the news of any major news outlet the world over, and things seem bad. So, what do Jains see as the greatest problems facing the world today?
yeah, so Jainism and also Buddhism, they were both started by leaders, Gautam, Siddhartha for Buddhism, and Vardhamana Mahavira for Jainism. These were two Kshatriyas, born in rich families. And a Kshatriya is a warrior.
Right.
And, they both thought the end of suffering is by giving away attachments. They gave up everything they had and led austere lives. As you know, all countries are struggling to end violence all over the world. And the path of Ahimsa and non-violence that these two have shown may be the key to establishing peace in the world. Restraint, peace and harmony, complete disarmament. When two Kshatriyas, the warriors, were able to give away, their fighting ways and were able to show a path to the world to establish peace. I think each and every country can follow Ahimsa. So those principles, I know it's always about the practice and the action. So the principles definitely are in place based on these religions, especially Jainism, non-violence and Ahimsa is something that you and me can practice on a daily basis, and that overall should lead to a philosophy of peace, I believe. So that's something that other countries could learn.
And you really just kind of nailed that. What I would ask as a follow-up is, how do you see solving some of these world's problems? So do you want to elaborate on that at all? I feel like you answered that pretty well.
Yeah, so that was about war, about giving away things, attachments. Now, the one thing that we know that, we a lot of countries are capitalistic societies, and we love things. If you've heard George Carlin, he has this very funny talk on attachments, and we have stuff, and then we have this stuff, and we have that stuff. So we are so attached to things. We want this, we want that. And I feel like Jainism, one of the principles of aparigraha is that whatever you want, desire, is going to give you pain. If you are going to stay away from attachments, then if you're able to give up your attachments, things that you want. And that's why you see the monks, the philosophy of being unclad or not wearing any clothes, that's a way of demonstrating that we can stay without these things. I read a story about a couple, and I don't know how true it was. I have not explored it much, but they talked about how they have stayed on minimal eating food and water, very little eating and drinking, and they still are able to maintain their bodies, and they have children. So I feel like the whole point being that we can give up things. We don't need so many things. So that can be, in general, overall good for the world to think about, where we feel like some parts of the world are so, they have so many things, and some parts of the world lack so many things. So is there a way to redistribute, or if we were not so attached to things that we want, would we be able to see better peace in the world, more peace in the world?
Yeah, and I think about that a lot, and I talk to my students about things as forms of temporary pleasure quite often, and I say to them, think about when a new iPhone is being announced, what is your response? Do you feel like you need that thing whenever you go to a store? Do you compulsively pick up new pairs of jeans and shoes and bracelets and watches? Like, do you have to have these things? Do you feel like you have to have these things? Where does that feeling come from? How has that been beaten into us as a culture? And then I also drive around, and whenever I drive past houses, I tend to look, and oftentimes whenever there's a garage door open, there will be things piled from the entire inside of the garage. And I don't get the impression that a garage being filled with boxes and mountains of stuff makes the person who lives in that house any happier. There's no way that the people that are living in there are happier as people, because they're living under a mountain of things that they feel like they can't get rid of for whatever reason. And it's really kind of sad as well.
Yeah, and you're talking to a person who myself have been through those cycles where I just accumulate stuff, and then I'm like, do I need this?
Yeah, and then you
Do I
just
need
purge
some?
it.
Yeah, and
Just
then you
get rid of
purge
it.
it, cleanse yourself, and so yes, I agree to that.
It's so interesting. And I find myself watching documentaries about Jainism quite frequently on YouTube. Like and I talked about this a lot in the introduction as well, but it's just amazing watching monks walk across India carrying virtually nothing, and that is everything that they own in the entire world. And that's kind of the point, you know? So, as a Jain, I know that you're really interested in Buddhism. I know that you're really interested in Jainism. I know that you're really interested in Hinduism. But as a Jain, what are some of your personal goals for your life?
Well, like I was saying earlier, I've had several influences, and some are dependent on my various phases in life. In childhood, I was more influenced by Hinduism and Jainism, and then I started reading about Buddhism in 2010. There is a center in Colombia called Shomi Dharma. It's a Buddhist meditation center, and I love going there. Hinduism has had an influence on me through deities, and the first book I remember reading as a child was Ramayana. My mom gave me an English translation, and I was introduced to Hanuman, the monkey god, Ganesha. Whenever we do something new, we always praise Lord Ganesha. Jainism and Buddhism were both started by leaders, as I was saying, who were Kshatriyas. And each of these religions I have been exposed to have facets that are worth considering bringing in your lives. They only differ in the emphasis. While the emphasis in Jainism is on non-violence, also fasting, and that's the way modern Jains show the world that they can give up daily needs, such as food for a few days. The emphasis in Buddhism is how to acknowledge that suffering exists and how to deal with it using meditation. How can you decondition your mind? How can you understand your own mind? Because we go through our things, and our minds are conditioned, and I think meditation helps decondition, or disentangle our minds. So I love non-violence because it brings peace. I believe in vegetarianism myself. It is so close to my heart. I don't think I will willingly be able to give up vegetarianism. So I like the idea of understanding your own mind via meditation and trying to decondition it. I learned walking meditation at Shomi Dharma, which brought a whole new meaning to my life, because before that, the only way I knew I could do meditation was while sitting. So my personal goal is to take all positives from all the religions I've been exposed to. Right now, it's Jainism and Buddhism that has been very fascinating to me. The peace, the non-violence aspect is very important. And I think even in the real world, it's... But one thing that I do feel like is that a lot of practitioners of nonviolence think, might misunderstand, just like I did once, is that you can't be meek. just because you practice non-violence doesn't mean that you are a meek person. So you have to still be strong, and should be able to become a good leader, following the principles of Ahimsa, and that's the challenge. So
Wonderful. So I always try to ask every in interviews most of the same sorts of questions, but are there any kind of problems that Jains face around the world? I know that many religions, it depends on where you live and who the minority and the majority populations of places are, but are there any problems that Jains face in the world today?
So in your introduction, you mentioned how Jains are kind of like a minority, and when you are a minority, you are bound to face situations, so where which will be challenging. So I remember the first time I ever came here to United States, and I had to go to a get together, and I ate cheese pizza there, and I saw cheese pizza there. Were the toppings tomato, or were the toppings pepperoni, or so I was confused, and I didn't want to touch anything because I thought that I would rather be safe. So that's just one example. But we've in Jainism, the tradition of the 24 Tirthankaras, which began with the first Tirthankara, the Rishabh, and these laws that they have provided, the Tirthankaras, along with Mahavira, the laws are the same, but the community, I've heard, has divided themselves, and there does not seem to be a way for them to come together on the same platform. And by division, I'm talking about the sects, various sects that are in Jainism. The chief of them being Shvetambars and Digambars. Digambars shun all clothing and they remain unclad, while Shvetambaras, they wear white robes. Those are the two major schools. And the problem that Jains face is also that I find, between these sects, is that the way they worship. So within even Shvetambars, there are further subdivisions, people who believe in idol worship, also known as Murti Pujak, and then the people who do not believe in idol worship, and they are called the Sthanakwasis. A problem that Jains can face, as I envision, is finding vegetarian food. It's very easy in India, not necessarily outside. Just like gluten-free diet here in USA, in every restaurant you will find a gluten-free diet.
Right.
Jain food is available everywhere in India, in restaurants in Mumbai especially. So I feel like not eating meat and that culture. My first encounter, when I asked a person preparing my Subway sandwich to make sure that they change their gloves because they touch meat, it was in a way a very challenging experience because I felt equally bad asking them to do that. And it's not just about eating meat. The culture of not being around meat is a tough one from a practical standpoint. But slowly but surely, I found a combination that worked for me, in Chipotle. And then I remember being nervous. When I'm standing in the queue all the while thinking, well, is this person going to touch meat before, and I do not want to tell them again to not, and I eventually compromised and I didn't care much. Today, I have stopped caring, but the main thing is that I try not to eat outside as much as possible, but then that goes against my this philosophy of trying new things.
Mm-hmm.
So, but you find your own way and what works for you, and you stick with the recipes and the food. The fact that I did not allow my friends to get meat inside my apartment, where probably many meat eaters have lived and cooked before I lived here.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that you always feel guilty when your entire office has to choose a place that serves vegetarian just because of you. So there is trauma, there is mental stress. And most of the times it hits you when you don't anticipate it. I had a conversation with a friend about in vitro meat recently, and they thought I was being unscientific in my approach by not agreeing to eat in vitro meat. It was two close friends. I came back home, mulled over it, and almost hated myself for being unscientific. Today, when it dawned upon me, as much scientific as I might want to be, in vitro meat is still meat. So if you did not eat a piece of rubber as your meal your entire life, if rubber has now become suddenly nutritional and totally harmless, will you be able to start eating rubber? It's the same way. So sometimes I think food and being a vegetarian can be a problem even in socializing. Sometimes I prefer not to talk about vegetarianism because you get shunned if you don't eat meat in some circles. Because for some of my friends, food is meat and meat is food. And then there's the other side. I feel like, am I being tolerant of other people's food preferences? Like, I still even don't know what an aroma, when I get it, what it means. Is it what kind of meat is being cooked? So the instruction used to be no garlic, no onion in Mumbai, but it has changed from that to no meat, no fish, no eggs in Colombia. So even going to an Indian restaurant is not easy for me because the restaurants here have meat dishes as well. So I'm not used to the sights and smells. So my friends even started calling my car as a vegetarian car because I would not let them carry leftovers, for if we went to Flat Branch one night. So yeah, those are some of the challenges just from the food standpoint. And food is an important part of culture. So I think there needs to be some direction on how to deal with those kind of challenges. So.
It's so interesting that you talk about the challenges of vegetarianism because you're sitting here talking to me, and I ate meat probably 2 or 3 meals a day for my entire life until I was about 28, 29. And then, but all along the way, I was learning about meat in general and the culture and the practices. And I started finding things that I was really just, troubled by. So a couple of years ago, my wife and I became vegetarian. And one of the major things that we learned is that we do not rely on other people to cater to us, because I realize fully that what we are doing is counter to the main culture in the region that we live in, the region that we grew up in, the families that we grew up in. And so now what we do is I'll take like a frozen bean burrito with me wherever I go, and a couple of bananas and an apple, and I'll just stick it in my bag and I'll carry it with me everywhere I go. So it took me having to be willing to stand up for something that I wanted to do and not expect everybody else to bend over backwards to meet me where I was, because we're not all in the same place,
True. And that reminds me that my mother travels a lot, many times to United States, and she and her friends, all of them who are Jains, they carry 3 bags full of food, and they don't eat outside for an entire month. So they carry as much food with them. So
that's fantastic. It's so interesting. I love the discussion of the Jain diet. It's just one of the most fascinating aspects. And I think that it's one of the most interesting things that like a Western audience would latch onto whenever wanting to learn more about Jainism is the food aspect. So I appreciate you being so forthright and discussing that in so much detail. So I have one more question for you. And you are so generous with your time. You've come and talked to the classes at the high schools here in Columbia. You have just sacrificed a holiday afternoon to sit here and talk to me about Jainism. And so what I kind of want to know is, why do you take the time to do my podcast? Why do you come visit the classrooms here in town? Why do you think that people should study about all religions?
So, as much as it might look like it's a one-way street, actually it's a two-way street. On one hand, I feel like I'm contributing my little bit by spreading the word and the concept of Jainism to places where it might not be known at all. On the other hand, the naive questions that students have asked me in classes have led me to explore my own religion a little more. And, you are an inspiration. All my knowledge throughout my life is through about religions is through what I've experienced. But I know that you traveled a lot. I'm not that well traveled, so I learn from meeting people like you and talking to people like you who learn various kinds of religions. So it's interesting how these various religions can be so interconnected. There was a fellow called Champat Rai Jain, a 20th century Jain writer, who claimed that the 4 and the 20 elders mentioned in the Christian Bible are 24 Jain Tirthankars. And I was amazed. I don't know if it's true or not, but in his book, Jainism, Christianity and Science, he wrote that. So the motto of Jainism is live and let live, as Mahavira had put forth for the lay Jains. It's a new way of life. You learn from it. Every religion brings with it a new, fresh set of ideas. it opens new channels in your brain, I believe. You become more open and a loving person when you know more about different cultures and religions. We are all born in a family and we have a pre-decided religion. We did not choose the religion. We should not be judged. Kids should not be bullied because of their religion or background. No matter whatever religion they choose to follow. Religious freedom is also important. But instead, if we can look at religions and learn what it has to offer, just like you do, the world will be a better place.
I learned so much from our conversations, and I hope to learn a lot more as well.
Thank you so much for having me, Greg.
Thanks for coming on the Classical Ideas podcast, Nish.
Good luck with the rest of the podcast.
The Classical Ideas podcast is written and performed by me, Greg Soden. Original music is composed and performed by Derek Strybig. His music can be found at www.wearewarmmusic.com. Thanks for listening.